Football season is right around the corner with OTAs and mini camps just kicking off. The National Football League is underway this season. Today, we got a special guest, Kevin Oestreicher. He is the host of Locked On Ravens. We're talking all things Baltimore Ravens today. Let's get into this. Kevin, what's going on, my man? Thank you for joining Big B Sports Talk today.
I appreciate you having me on. Excited to talk Ravens, excited to talk football. We're getting closer and closer to the regular season, so I'm excited for it.
Absolutely. OTAs, mini camps, all over the place, man. This is, to me, it's a dead period because NBA Finals, I like covering and talking basketball, but I love football way more. And now that that's over, we can kind of dive into the minutia of pro football and kind of get to the nuts and bolts of this thing. So appreciate you joining. Let's start here, and let's just get into it. Obviously, signing Lamar Jackson back and getting him in the fold with all the drama that went on in the offseason with his contract, getting him back, getting him underway, and getting him signed, and with the other additions on offense, how good can the offense be for the Ravens?
I think it could be incredible. You mentioned Lamar. He's the engine. He is the guy that makes the gears turn. And there was a lot of uncertainty this offseason about if Lamar would be the guy. Would they trade him for a high pick and take Bryce Young or CJ Stroud or Anthony Richardson? But they get their guy under contract for 5 years. And you mentioned the other additions. Odell Beckham Jr. was huge. There's been this thing surrounding the Baltimore organization. You can go back however far you want to about them and wide receivers. They just can't sign veterans. They can't draft guys. They've had a couple of really good ones. Derek Mason coming through, Anquan Bolden, Steve Smith Sr. Now, Odell has an opportunity to maybe be on that list. Now, coming off the ACL surgery, didn't play last year, so there's a little bit of a what's he going to be factor. But I think the biggest addition, honestly, is Todd Monken, a coach who they get rid of Greg Roman and his offense. There just wasn't enough growth year to year after 2019 to justify keeping him on for the ride. Todd Monken comes in off of national championships with Georgia, NFL experience. And now we're going to see Lamar Jackson they're throwing the football a lot more. He is, contrary to popular belief, for some reason, he is a great thrower of the football. Still doesn't get enough credit for that, in my opinion. But also, he's going to have more freedom, I'd say, in this offense where, you see quarterbacks get that freedom, especially young ones, every year, like year to year. Lamar didn't really have that. One, because the Ravens will get their plays in so late, they get to the line with maybe 3 seconds to go. And as a young quarterback, I think you should be allowed to have time to go out there, figure out where guys are lining up on defense, audible out of a play, figure out where the pressure is coming from. Yep. We're going to see a lot more of that from Lamar this year. So just getting him back under contract is huge. Adding these pieces is huge as well. But the offense is going to be in, I think, is the biggest part of maybe why this team could maybe ascend to a big playoff run or maybe even a championship this year.
Right. And that was going to be where I went with the next question, is just talking about how is Todd Monken going to change the offense? And sounds like, a lot more passing, because the Ravens were a run-oriented team. You did mention this, that people, for some reason, the misconception that Lamar Jackson can't throw the football. Look, I get it. Maybe he has some issues outside the numbers, but I don't know how many good quarterbacks there are in the NFL that don't have good receivers on the outside that can get separation and make the plays that are necessary. There's not a whole lot of them. And Lamar Jackson was still completing passes at a very, very high clip, even last year before he got hurt. Not to mention the Ravens were 9-3. I did the misconception that they weren't very good last year. I don't know where that's coming from. And this is coming from a diehard Steeler fan. It's the misconceptions that the Ravens struggled last year. And I'm like, when Lamar Jackson was in and healthy, they weren't struggling. That I don't know where that comes from. Do you know where any of that comes from?
I think it was probably the drop-off that happened after the first 3 weeks. The first 3 weeks, Lamar played like the MVP of the year, or that the year for Baltimore, where the game against the Jets came out with a bang. The Miami game, which they actually lost, the defense blew that fourth quarter lead. It was 20+. He went off that game. Then New England had another great one. So he was at the top of the MVP conversation again in 2022. But then the offense as a whole started to struggle a tiny bit, or just compared to what it was over those first 3 weeks.
Right.
So there was a drop off from then until Lamar got hurt against Denver. And there were issues with Lamar's deep ball accuracy. I'd say inconsistent, had a couple of beautiful throws. The one that sticks out to me is Deshaun Jackson, the 70-plus yard bomb he had to him in the Jacksonville game. But against Cincinnati in week 5, for example, prime time, he missed 2 wide open deep ball touchdowns in 3 plays. And it was that inconsistency that I think people, he's regressing. He can't throw. And that's just not true whatsoever. Everybody has those inconsistent struggles. And I think for Lamar, we've seen him improve in other areas year to year, where I feel confident enough saying that, look, he can fix those things up. Because look, coming into the league, he was a raw passer. He wasn't right. Good one. He was raw. He needed to work on stuff and improve stuff, as every rookie does. It's not just the Lamar Jackson thing. So he did that. He obviously won the MVP in 2019, but I just think the inconsistency on offense and their ability to close games was really lacking. Last year, they lost a bunch of close games, blew a bunch of leads in really weird situations where you wouldn't really expect a Baltimore-led team to do that. So that was another area where I think Baltimore just looked like they weren't, the Ravens, if you want to put it that way. And I think that's where people's inconsistencies were with, they were great in the beginning of the year, but then look at how they fell off. And then obviously once Lamar goes out, that changes everything.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You did mention the defense, blowing a couple of leads. I like Mike Macdonald. I think he's a great defensive coordinator. Do you think he's going to be to ensure that maybe they stay on top and keep some of these leads? You think that they are going to look to be even more aggressive this year as a defense?
Yeah, I would say so. And I think earlier in the season, I mentioned the Miami game. That's something that, early on, Mike Macdonald coming over from Michigan. He was actually with the Ravens for, multiple years before going to Michigan for that year. But it's different, when he was an assistant coach, worked with a bunch of different positions with the Ravens before going to Michigan. And it's a whole different ball game being a defensive coordinator for a year in college and having that experience. And then coming back to the NFL and being a defensive coordinator there, there's going to be a little grace period where you have to give the defense a little time to work it out and figure out what the identity is. So I think as the year went on, they saw their identity start to form, which is it's not as aggressive as Don Martindale's group was. Don Martindale is known for living by the blitz, dying by the blitz. That's his pretty much personality when it comes to defense.
Yep.
But with Mike Macdonald, I think that there is another area with him where he understands the game. Not that Don Martindale didn't, but he understands the game. And that, to me, elevates his players. They also made a great trade at the deadline, bringing in Roquan Smith, and that elevated the defense to a whole nother level, especially Patrick Queen, who was playing well without him in his third year. But again, Roquan Smith just brought that defense up. So I'm encouraged with what I saw. And honestly, the Ravens, they built their defense. There are a lot of talks about, certain teams build for certain opponents. I think the Ravens have built for Cincinnati in that high-powered offense where, again, corner is going to be a bit of an interesting conversation this offseason in terms of what is after Marlon Humphrey and Rock Ya-Sin. But the Ravens held that Cincinnati team. If Tyler Huntley doesn't fumble on the goal line to go up 7, instead they go down 7 because, you have the long touchdown, that whole game could have been different. The Ravens actually they held their own with Cincinnati when they played their guys. The last game of the season, they didn't really play their guys that game. But I think that Baltimore's defense is built for Cincinnati. They're going to have to run. The North is Cincinnati's division right now. We got to give them credit here where they've won it 2 years. I think that for Mike Macdonald in this unit, there's a lot of, I'd say optimism surrounding what they can do, especially a second year of Mike Macdonald, where it's not him coming in wet behind the ears and figuring out where is everything? What do I do here? What do I do there? He has the year of experience where then you can talk about the offense. Todd Monken, he's been an NFL offensive coordinator before. It's not like Mike Macdonald where he had never been an NFL defensive coordinator. So to me, I'm excited for the defense personally.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You brought up the division. It's the Bengals division. They own it right now. How tough do you think that this AFC North is going to be this year?
Man, one of the best divisions in football, honestly. I mean, you can even expand that conversation to the AFC. I'll focus on the North. But the AFC, there are going to be a couple teams that don't make the playoffs this year where you're like, wow, this guy didn't make this quarterback didn't make the playoffs. But I mean, the AFC North, Cincinnati is their division right now. Got to give them credit where it's due. You can never count out teams like Baltimore and Pittsburgh, though. Cleveland, they got to show it to me first. There have been too many offseason championships for them. I honestly like, for the most part, what Angie Berry's done with that roster. Didn't like the Deshaun Watson trade personally, but I think that everything that they've done, it's weird how they just haven't been able to put it all together. So I'm not counting anything on Cleveland right now. I'm saying, you got to show it to me first, Cleveland. So I'm putting them in a different conversation. But Baltimore and Pittsburgh are teams that, again, everybody thought Pittsburgh was going to be like a 4-win team last year, 5-win team. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, you can't count out Mike Tomlin. Nope. You can't count out John Harbaugh either. So with Cincinnati, they added some pieces. Everybody did, honestly. Every team in the division added some really nice pieces this offseason. Cincinnati, Orlando Brown Jr., and the offensive line we know has been a weakness for them ever since Joe Burrow came into Cincinnati. And then you have Baltimore, Odell, Beckham, and Rock Ya-Sin and those guys as well. Pittsburgh with a couple of really nice additions, and I think that they had a absolutely insane draft. Every pick, I'm like, really? This guy's in Pittsburgh now? So, we got to deal with that. And then Cleveland, Juan Thornhill and some of those players they brought in. So every team in that division added some really nice pieces. I think that, the floor for wins in this division, whoever finishes in last place, I could see 8 wins, 9, like even like 7 on the low end. There could realistically be 3 teams in this division that make the playoffs. And that's saying something considering how good you look at the NFC and you're like, Philadelphia and San Francisco and who else is in that conference. In the AFC, if 3 teams from the North make the playoffs, you can definitely call it one of the best divisions of football with how the AFC is just stacked right now.
Absolutely. It's crazy because I know it goes in shifts. And now the shift is AFC heavy on how good the teams are. NFC, I mean, there's a couple of teams. The team that's surprised that I think is going to surprise a few people is going to be Seattle. I think Seattle is going to be better than what a lot of people think. As long as Geno Smith plays like he did the first 3 quarters of the season last year, Seattle's going to be really good. But yeah, this AFC North is just a head just banger, crazy division. Here's the thing. As a Steeler fan, you look at it, it's like, okay, Kenny Pickett, if you just look at talent, he's the 4th best quarterback in the division. If you just look at it, he's the 4th best. There's not a lot of times where the 4th best quarterback, number one, is that team even any good? Number 2, can they make the playoffs? This is one of those years where it's like, yeah, that can actually happen, where they have an opportunity to make the playoffs, but yet you're the 4th best quarterback in the division. It's just, I don't know. I haven't seen it like this, at least in this division, in a while. All the teams are always usually good. I mean, it's the AFC North. They're going to be good, exception for Cincinnati a few years and forever. But, Baltimore and Pittsburgh were always going to be good. That kind of leads me to the next thing I was going to ask you about. John Harbaugh, he took some flack a little bit over this Lamar Jackson thing. It went back and forth. But to me personally, I think that John Harbaugh is in the top 5 coaches in the National Football League.
Yeah, I agree. At least top 10 easy to me. Yeah. Like, even so. And I think, for Ravens fans and Steelers fans, I think there's a lot of similar conversation about, they haven't won in so long. Like, this continuity stuff. You got to get the bright young minds. And I'm thinking, well, if you let go of a guy like John Harbaugh or Mike Tomlin, you have to be 1,000% sure that the next guy's going to be better. Because if either of those guys were to get let go, they'd be scooped up in an instant. There'd be a line out the door to get those guys in. They're culture setters. And I think, look, every head coach has their weaknesses, right? I'm not saying that John Harbaugh does it. I'm not saying Mike Tomlin does it. But those are guys who the players respect, the players love to play for. And I think it's becoming harder and harder to find that in the NFL nowadays, where we're seeing all this, continuity and turnover. You mentioned the NBA at the beginning of the show. I'm a Nuggets fan. They just won the championship. Michael Malone is someone who was in the league for a long time, paid his dues, was fired in Sacramento, comes to Denver and is there for 8 years in wins there. So it takes time for these things. And John Harbaugh and Mike Tomlin are both champions. So you have to figure that with these coaches, it's a big year for John Harbaugh. I think that we've seen the firings before the big one where things go wrong. So Don Martindale 2 years ago, and then Greg Roman this past year. The only other guy left in terms of big coaches, it would be John Harbaugh. And then you have to kind of evaluate, well, what is it? So anything can happen in this league. Obviously, you got to stay healthy. Baltimore knows that from 2021 when they lost their whole running back, Ruben Marcus Peters, before the year started. But that plays a big factor. But if the Ravens underachieve this year, I think this could be a make or break year for John Harbaugh in terms of his status, because while, again, I think another team would scoop him up really fast and he's still a great head coach, the fact of the matter is Baltimore hasn't made it to the AFC Championship game since they won the Super Bowl back in 2012, 2013. So over a decade long here without advancing past the divisional round. They've been a great regular season team, but when it comes down to it, that's not what matters at the end of the day. It's getting to the playoffs, winning championships, getting to the Super Bowl. To me, I'm a big proponent of growth, where I think we saw that, Lamar Jackson's first year, wild card round exit. Okay, cool. Rookie year comes in, second year divisional round exit, obviously very disappointing based off of what they did that year, 14-2. Then you have 2020 where they get the wild card win. That's growth. They won a playoff game. Then they lose in the divisional round. But then these past 2 years, not making the playoffs and then losing in the wild card round. Health was obviously a big factor. Lamar Jackson, of course. But if there's no growth this year, if there's no accomplishment of, oh, hey, we can get to an AFC Championship game. We can go to the Super Bowl. I think Baltimore would have to evaluate just, is it time? There's always time for these things. I don't think it has been time yet. But again, if there's another wild card exit, I think they're going to have to consider what their options are. And there are no coordinators to fire anymore because they've done it back-to-back years.
Absolutely. Totally understand. And that's kind of the thing. You brought up Mike Malone for Denver. It's like, look, if you think you have the guy, then you got to give him time to grow. You can't just say, okay, well, it didn't work after 3 years. He's out of here. It's not the way these things work sometimes. So, John Harbaugh is a staple. It's just like Mike Tomlin, a staple. But at the same time, and this is a conversation that Steeler fans, we've been having the last few years, the Steelers, we haven't won a playoff game since 2016. It's like, okay, look, what are we doing here? How do we get better? I feel like the Ravens, though, are on the right track. Look, they got their quarterback. The guy's phenomenal. I think that the injury bug hit him a little bit. I don't know that I would say that he's injury prone. I know a lot of people throw out he's injury prone. But the thing that he got hurt in, and that's what everybody says, well, he can't keep running around. Well, he didn't get hurt as running around. That's not what he was doing. Yep. He wasn't out there running and he got tackled and hit like that. That's not the case. So he does have to stay healthy. But yeah, it's kind of what you mentioned. The Ravens have been not bitten. They have been swallowed by the injury bug the last few seasons. It's just been absolutely insane. And still to be able to put that kind of, product out on the field. I mean, a team losing all their running backs, I don't know how another team can survive, how they can even win 3 or 4 games, with that kind of just I guess you would call it unluck or, being unlucky. It's just crazy how that happened. But moving to one of the last questions that I had for you is any additions this year, whether it's free agency or draft picks or unsigned, or undrafted free agents, any additions that might be a surprise that have gone under the radar that may make the roster and do some damage for the Ravens this year?
Yeah, I think Baltimore it was such a weird offseason for them where it was all Lamar Jackson for so long.
Right.
But I do think that, when you talk about Odell, that's a guy that's not an under the radar move, but I think adding Zay Flowers is one that people look at Odell and Rashad Bateman and say, oh, those are your top 2 guys. Zay Flowers will kind of grow into a role over the next couple of years, and he'll be like one of those big-time players in year 3. I think he can do it now. I think he can do it in year 1. He is that good of a player, a 3-level wide receiver, can do short, intermediate, deep game. And again, I think just devastating in terms of what he can do to defenders' ankles, just open field in the open space.
Right.
So to me, I think that's going to be really, really important for them. And I also think for what Baltimore has on the defensive side of the ball, it's going to be a big year for the secondary again, because we know this is a passing league. You have to have quality cornerbacks. Rock Ya-Sin is someone who they brought in essentially at this point replacing Marcus Peters. Peters, maybe he comes back, maybe he doesn't, but for now he slots in as that number 2 guy for them. And he's someone who is super physical, great in press man, and is able to really get up. He's a former, wrestling star. So he's sumo suplex guys on the field, just sumo wrestling moves. So I think to me, that's the type of corner they love. Marlon Humphrey is one of the most physical guys in the NFL, one of the most physical corners. And look, sometimes he gets penalties because he's holding guys, he's grabbing guys, and that's just you got to live with that with Marlon Humphrey. But Rock Ya-Sin is someone who I think is a little underrated because I don't think he's the name Marcus Peters is, but I think he is very solid. And you can have him as your number 2 or number 3 guy. They're going to use him as the number 2 essentially right now. And it's going to be big for them. So to me, I think Zay Flowers and Rock Ya-Sin are the 2 guys. They didn't make too many additions. I think they're a team usually that just likes to, re-sign their own players, draft guys, and develop them that way. But those are two players, and maybe a sneaky one. I will say maybe one sneaky one is Nelson Aguilar, someone who has had drop problems throughout his entire career. We obviously know that viral clip that went viral in Philly with fires and dropping catching babies on like Aguilar. But he's someone that he's a deep ball threat, and it's essentially trading DeMarcus Robinson for Nelson Aguilar. And I think that is a small, however small, it is a small upgrade in that 4th, 5th wide receiver department. Look, we talked about health. If Rashad Bateman has to miss a few games, he's missed big time in his first 2 seasons. If Odell has some time as well, you have to have players that will step up. Zay Flowers, I think, will do that. But you have to have guys, I think, around the edges, around the margins that can as well. And maybe Aguilar can.
Got it. Well, I hate asking this question, but, I feel like I have to do it. Prediction. Record prediction that you have for the Ravens this season.
Baltimore's super interesting because the schedule dropped a couple weeks ago now, and
right.
They have they don't have a lot of time to really get in and settle into the year because all 3 of their road AFC North games come in the first 5 weeks of the year. Whew. They're done with them after week 5. So if you're talking about a new offense and kind of, we have a couple weeks to settle in, and the Ravens are saying, we're sitting pretty, we can lose a couple games. They really can't. They really can't lose. Now, weeks 1 and 3, it's Houston and Indianapolis. So 2 rookie quarterbacks. Baltimore historically has been pretty good against those. But if you start 1 and 2 in the division, instead of maybe 2 and 1, or what they would hope would be 3 and 0, sets you back a little bit, especially as we just talked about how stacked the AFC is. Every win in that conference, I'm huge on conference wins. Obviously, every win counts, but a loss to the Cardinals in early December is not going to kill you as much as a early season loss to Pittsburgh for seeding in the AFC. So to me, I think Baltimore could be right around that 12-5, 13-4 range. I could see them go 14-3 is probably like a high mark for me. And then maybe 11-6 is like the low mark. This is going to be a competitive division. I could see both Cincinnati and Pittsburgh finishing in that same territory as well, based off of the consistency that I think obviously Mike Tomlin has, and then Cincinnati's high-powered offense. But for Baltimore, I think this is a playoff caliber team, but it's just a matter of how they start this year, because the end of season schedule for them, they have a lot of primetime games in there. They're generally good in primetime, but a lot of AFC opponents to end that season. The NFC West, Pittsburgh, the whole AFC North has to play it. So Baltimore has to take advantage of that as well. But I'll say in that 13-4, 12-5 range is where I'll go.
Got it. That's where I put them at, the 12-13 win range. I think Baltimore is going to have a great year. I think this is going to be a year where Lamar Jackson has had enough, and he is going to answer a lot of these critics. My prediction, and I've said it, and I think Lamar Jackson wins the MVP this year. I really do. I think the Ravens are going to be that good. I think they're going to win the division. I think they're better than Cincinnati. I know Cincinnati's won it the last 2 years. I just think the Ravens are just better than they are. I think Lamar Jackson comes out and proves to a lot of people, hey, I was always this good. You have some hurdles. It's football. You can't be great every snap. That's not the way that it works. It's just not the way that it works. So, well, thank you, Kevin. I appreciate you taking the time, man, to join us and giving us some knowledge on the Ravens that we didn't know. Anytime you want to come back, I appreciate you joining, and good luck to you, and I appreciate it, man. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. Anytime you want me on, I'll be more than happy to come back. I appreciate you, and we'll talk again soon.
All right, man. Thank you.